My presentation today will be about the infamous concentration camp of Dachau, one of the most important camps used by the Nazis. Dachau opened very soon after Hitler rose to power in 1933. Its initial purpose was a camp to imprison political opponents such as Social Democrats and Communists. It was portrayed as a place where prisoners might learn their lesson for disrupting the regime, but the SS guards at the time knew that this was not necessarily the case. In 1933, a school teacher from Munich was beaten to death in Dachau by prison guards. The Munich public prosecutor attempted to seek punishment for those responsible, but Hitler stated that regular German law was not applicable in Dachau or any other camp, and that the SS could punish prisoners however they might like. The camp's commander did, however, resign shortly after the incident, only to be replaced by the far more brutal Theodor Eicke. This changed the way the camp was run for the worse, as it became more brutal than before and was a model for how other concentration camps across Europe would be run. The camp was essentially divided into two areas, the camp area and the crematoria area. The camp area included barracks for prisoners, a courtyard, and a central kitchen. The crematoria included the gas chambers and a crematorium. At the gates of Dachau, the sign read in German, "Work sets you free." This was because it was initially used more for forced labor and only became a death camp towards the end of the war. As mentioned before, most inmates initially were political prisoners alongside German Jews. Later on, homosexuals and Jehovah's Witnesses also began being imprisoned in Dachau. The camp was famous for its large number of clergy imprisoned. Most were Catholics, but there were Protestants and Muslims present there too. They were usually imprisoned for criticizing the regime. Different inmates were given different badges based on what they were imprisoned for. In total, around 200,000 people went through this camp, and around 25,000 died in the main camp, with 10,000 more dying in sub-camps. Prisoners were used for medical experiments, mostly to do with subjecting prisoners to extreme cold and trying to revive them through awful methods such as pouring scalding water over them. Due to the nature of these experiments, the Nazis destroyed most of their records in an attempt to hide their crimes. Towards the end of the war, other camps had begun being evacuated, and prisoners were forced to walk or be executed. Himmler planned to have prisoners in the north march to the sea and drowned, while prisoners in the south were to be moved to the Alps for the SS's last stand against the Allies. There was an attempted revolt in Dachau, but it was quickly and brutally crushed by the SS. As the war was coming to an end, plans were made to execute all prisoners, but this never happened. Instead, they began to be moved towards Tyrol. An escaped prisoner made contact with American troops who managed to negotiate the surrender of the camp. Nearby soldiers were told to visit the camp and see the horrors of what was happening if any of them doubted what they were fighting for. When the camp was liberated, there were also Soviet deserters that tried to avoid being sent back to the Soviet Union. 10 of them committed suicide and 21 attempted suicide before being returned to the Soviets. Living conditions for the inmates were immediately improved upon the liberation of the camp, and they were all given medical attention and food. By October of 1945, it was being used to hold war criminals that awaited trial. It then became a refugee camp for Sudeten Germans that had been moved out of Czechoslovakia. After this, it was used by Americans as a military base until it closed in 1960. A memorial was built to commemorate the victims of Dachau throughout the 60s. Dachau was one of the most famous concentration camps used by the Nazis and likely the most well-known one located in Germany. Part of this is due to its size, being one of the largest in Germany, but it's also because of it being the first of its kind. It showed the bleak future facing the Jews and other minorities as early as 1933, and it became the example that camps across Europe would soon follow.